Don't touch him, unless you're ready to pay for everything. That's what the doctor told her. Evelyn froze. Rain dripped from her chin. Her baby convulsed in her arms. She turned to the stranger beside her, this man in a suit worth more than her yearly income, and whispered, "Please, just save my son." He stared at her like he wasn't sure she was real. Then, slowly, he reached for the child. What he did next would cost him everything: his image, his career, and the silence he'd used as armor for decades. But would it be enough to save them? Before we begin this true story of sacrifice, shame, and second chances, drop a comment below. Tell us, have you ever helped a stranger and never looked back? Let us know where you're watching from, and if you believe some strangers were never meant to stay strangers. The rain fell like a curtain drawn tight across Manhattan's midnight skyline, each drop a drumbeat of urgency pounding on the streets below. Evelyn Moore, her coat barely more than a damp rag clinging to her skin, stumbled onto the slick pavement outside the upscale restaurant where warmth and laughter thrived just beyond the glass. She cradled her son Henry, barely 2 years old, his small frame racked with violent shivers, his lips tinged with purple. "Please," she gasped, her voice cracking into the storm. "Help my baby." Thunder cracked, distant but cruel, echoing her desperation as she dropped to her knees on the wet concrete, shielding Henry from the wind's bite with her own trembling body. Inside, guests in tailored suits raised their glasses and laughed, oblivious to the storm just feet away. And then, headlights. A sleek black SUV came to a slow stop at the curb, and from behind rain-streaked glass, a man watched. Jonathan Reed, tech CEO, billionaire, cloaked in a sharp black suit and the silence of too many lonely years, was ready to return to his penthouse and his fortress of solitude when the sound pierced him. A scream, raw and maternal. He turned his head, eyes narrowing through the downpour, and there she was, a young woman soaked to the bone, clutching a convulsing child to her chest. She staggered toward the SUV. Their eyes met through glass and pain. "Please, sir, he's dying. I have no car. No one else is stopping." Jonathan's hand hovered over the window controls, hesitation fighting instinct. Then he saw the boy's face, fragile, helpless, and in it, a reflection of a memory he had buried long ago. In that moment, the man who once chose silence opened the door. The rain soaked Jonathan Reed's expensive suit within seconds, but he didn't flinch as he stepped out of the SUV and knelt beside the trembling woman. Evelyn's face was pale, streaked with tears and rain, her breath ragged as she shielded her son with her body. "He's burning up," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the storm. "He won't stop shaking." Jonathan bent forward, brushing his hand gently against Henry's tiny arm, hot to the touch, feverish and limp. There was no time. "Open the back seat," he barked at his driver, who responded immediately. He moved with precision, yet his voice was soft as he looked into Evelyn's wide, terrified eyes. "Get in. We're going to the hospital. Now." She didn't speak, didn't question. She simply climbed into the car as Jonathan lifted the child with surprising tenderness, holding him against his chest. Henry whimpered, his breath shallow, his small fingers curling weakly into Jonathan's jacket. Inside the SUV, the warmth was artificial, but the urgency was real. Evelyn wrapped herself around Henry, one arm still touching him even as Jonathan gave the driver the name of the nearest ER. Then silence, tense, thick, humming with the sound of tires slicing through wet streets. Evelyn stared out the window, her mind racing, her heart breaking. She didn't know this man, but he had stopped. He had seen her. Jonathan's eyes remained forward, his jaw tense, his thoughts somewhere far back in time. A memory clawed at him. A hospital corridor, a boy with golden hair, him, sitting alone beside a dying woman. His mother. No insurance, no help, just pleading eyes and a too-late goodbye. That same pain now flickered in Evelyn's eyes, and it cut him deeper than he expected. At the hospital, nurses rushed to the SUV as Jonathan carried Henry through the doors without waiting. "Pediatric emergency," he called out. Evelyn followed close behind, soaked and shivering. In the harsh light of the ER, a doctor appeared. "What happened?" "Fever, seizures, possible pneumonia," Jonathan answered before Evelyn could speak. The doctor nodded, motioning toward a gurney. Evelyn hesitated, overwhelmed, but Jonathan placed a hand on her back. "He's going to be okay," he said firmly, his voice quieter now, almost a promise. And for the first time in days, Evelyn let herself believe it might be true. The hospital air was sharp with disinfectant and hushed urgency as Evelyn sat hunched beside the gurney, her hand clutched around Henry's tiny fingers, feeling the rise and fall of his fevered breaths. Across the ER room, Jonathan stood motionless, arms crossed, his tailored suit still dripping from the storm. But the cold didn't touch him now. He wasn't thinking about the stock prices he usually monitored by the second, or the boardroom where silence was strength. He was thinking about a night when he'd been 9, alone in a sterile hospital room, gripping his mother's hand as machines beeped and doctors whispered in tones too polite to hide the truth. He remembered the smell, the sharp fluorescent lights, and the way she smiled even when her eyes betrayed she knew she was leaving. "It's going to be okay, baby," she had whispered with lips too dry to speak clearly. It hadn't been okay, not for years. And now here was this child, this boy, with the same golden hair, the same helpless expression, lying on a gurney while his mother begged fate to give her just one more chance. A doctor approached. "Severe pneumonia, early signs of sepsis. We need to admit him immediately. He needs IV antibiotics, possibly more." Evelyn's voice cracked. "But I don't have insurance. I was laid off last week. I can't pay." Her words didn't rise above a whisper, but Jonathan heard every syllable. He stepped forward before the doctor could answer, pulling out his wallet and placing a platinum card on the counter. "Treat him," he said, his voice steady but rough. "Whatever it costs. He's not waiting for approval." The nurse stared for a moment, caught in the gravity of his tone, then nodded and rushed into action. Evelyn turned to Jonathan, tears slipping silently down her face. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "You don't know me. You don't owe us anything." Jonathan looked at Henry, then back at her. "When I was a boy," he said slowly, "no one came for us. No one stopped. But tonight, I can stop. So I did." And with that, something unspoken passed between them. Not trust, not yet, but a thread, fragile and real, stitched by memory and mercy. For a while, everything in the hospital room held its breath. Machines hummed softly. Henry lay motionless under the thin blanket, and Evelyn sat silently, her hands wrapped around a paper cup of lukewarm coffee she couldn't bring herself to drink. Across the room, Jonathan stood by the window, his phone buzzing incessantly in his pocket. He ignored it until a new notification forced its way onto the screen. A headline in bold, cruel letters. "Tech billionaire in secret scandal with struggling single mom." Beneath it, a blurry image of him outside the hospital, Henry in his arms, Evelyn weeping at his side. He blinked, then scrolled. Dozens of reposts, tabloids speculating, investors pulling out. His chest tightened, not with regret for helping, but for what the world was turning it into. The past he had buried behind boardrooms and algorithms had been cracked open, and now it bled into every corner of his empire. In the hallway, his assistant's voice trembled over the phone. "The board wants a statement. They're demanding damage control." Jonathan didn't answer. He looked through the glass at Evelyn and Henry, saw the quiet way she pressed a cool cloth to her son's forehead, saw how her hand shook with exhaustion but never left him. He remembered his mother's trembling hand and how no one had come when it mattered. Now, someone had. And he wasn't going to run. Not yet. But when he returned to the room, Evelyn's expression had changed. She had seen the article. Her voice broke before it even formed words. "I didn't ask for this. I never wanted attention. I only needed help. For him." Her eyes pleaded for belief. "You think I did this on purpose?" Jonathan's mouth opened, but no words came. For a man used to control, to knowing the right move in every crisis, this felt like free fall. "I trusted you," she said softly, "and now I feel like I've destroyed everything." Silence pressed between them, heavier than before. Jonathan swallowed hard, his voice thin. "So do I." He turned and walked out, the weight of the world chasing him down the corridor. But halfway to the elevator he paused, heart pounding. Behind all the noise he realized something louder than scandal was whispering. Conscience. And it wasn't done speaking yet. The night outside the hospital was quiet. But inside Jonathan Reed's chest, a storm raged louder than the tabloids. He sat in his car, unmoving, headlights casting a pale cone of light onto the empty sidewalk. His hands gripped the steering wheel, not from anger, but from fear, from the weight of choices he couldn't undo. Moments ago he had walked away from Evelyn, from Henry, from the fragile connection he hadn't known he needed, until it broke. But as he stared at his reflection in the rearview mirror, he didn't see the billionaire anymore. He saw the boy who had once begged for someone to care. The boy whose mother had whispered, "It's going to be okay," as her body failed her. That boy still lived inside him, and he was tired of pretending he didn't. With a sharp breath, Jonathan opened the door and stepped out into the night again, the rain beginning to fall in gentle drops, like a baptism he didn't know he'd been waiting for. By the time he reached the hospital entrance, his chest burned, not from the weather, but from something unnameable and real. Nurse Harlow saw him first and walked over, her expression gentle. "She won't call you," she said, nodding toward the room. "But the boy, he asks for you." Jonathan nodded once and walked down the hall. Through the glass he saw Evelyn, slumped in the chair beside the bed, her fingers curled protectively around Henry's tiny hand. The child's breaths were shallow but steady. Machines beeped in quiet rhythm. Jonathan stepped inside, his footsteps soft, but his presence immediate. Evelyn looked up, but didn't speak. He knelt beside her, pulled the hospital blanket over her shoulders, and whispered, "I was a coward, but not anymore." She didn't answer, not with words. Her eyes welled with tears and disbelief. When he reached for Henry's hand, hers didn't pull away. He leaned close to the child and whispered, "I'm here now, little man. You're not alone." And in that fragile, exhausted silence, Evelyn rested her head against his arm, the last of her strength crumbling. They didn't speak again that night. They didn't need to, because sometimes healing begins not with answers, but with someone who stays. Morning light filtered softly through the hospital blinds, and for the first time in days, the air felt still, as if the building itself exhaled with relief. Jonathan sat cross-legged on the tiled floor of Henry's hospital room, a comic book open between them. Henry's laughter, still hoarse but genuine, bubbled up as he pointed at a cartoon superhero with mismatched socks. "That's me," he giggled. "Silly but strong." Jonathan smiled, his voice low. "Strongest kid I've ever met." Across the room, Evelyn leaned in the doorway, a cup of coffee growing cold in her hands. She watched them, the man who had once seemed unreachable, now kneeling beside her son, letting him win a game of Go Fish and pretending not to notice when the cards were upside down. Each day, Jonathan returned. Some mornings he brought books, others plastic dinosaurs, always cookies. He learned how Henry liked his juice, apple, no pulp, and that he believed Legos could fix anything, including sadness. One afternoon, as they rebuilt a wobbly block tower for the third time, Jonathan whispered, "Maybe it just needs a stronger base." Henry beamed. "Then let's build it together." Evelyn smiled from her chair, her walls slowly softening. Later that evening, after Henry had fallen asleep mid-sentence, Evelyn sat beside Jonathan at the window, knees brushing. "You didn't have to keep coming," she said, voice low. "But I wanted to," he replied. "Because he matters. You both do." She looked at him for a long moment, searching for some agenda in his eyes, but found none. Only sincerity and something softer. "What are we?" she finally asked, not quite ready to believe what she felt. Jonathan didn't answer right away. He looked at the child asleep between them, the drawings taped on the wall, one of a man, a woman, and a boy under a crooked sun. "I don't know yet," he said honestly, "but I know where I want to be. Here. With you." And in that moment, Evelyn didn't need a promise. Just presence. And presence, when offered freely, was more than enough. The autumn sun slanted across the front steps of the modest Connecticut church, golden and warm like something remembered from childhood. Evelyn stood in ivory lace, her hand trembling slightly in Jonathan's, but her eyes steady. Henry, beaming in a miniature navy suit and suspenders, held tightly to the velvet ring box, swinging his feet with barely contained excitement. Inside, friends, nurses, and foundation staff filled the pews, not as guests of wealth, but witnesses to something rare, a family built from something deeper than blood or circumstance. The officiant spoke gently of new beginnings, of promises made not from fairy tales, but forged through fire and resilience. When Evelyn placed the ring on Jonathan's finger, she whispered, "You showed up when we were invisible. I see you too now." Jonathan's hand trembled slightly as he returned the ring. "You gave me something I never built. Home." Henry reached for both their hands as the chapel echoed with quiet applause, the kind that belongs more to relief than spectacle. Outside, a vintage convertible waited beneath trees dusted with amber leaves. As they climbed in, Henry perched between them, his laughter carried on the breeze like a hymn. Later, parked in a quiet grove by the river, they stepped onto soft grass. Jonathan knelt, not in proposal, but in gratitude. "Your courage saved us all," he said, his voice unsteady. He looked at Henry. "And you, kiddo, you taught me how to stay." Evelyn reached down, pulling them both to their feet, and whispered, "And your heart finally came home." They stood together as a family, imperfect, healed, and fiercely whole. The wind moved gently around them, like a blessing, and somewhere between Stamford and the broken places they had come from, they chose not just each other, but a new life. If this story touched you, if it reminded you that even strangers in the rain can become family, don't keep it to yourself. Share your thoughts below, like the video, and subscribe to our channel for more stories that stir the soul. Because sometimes, the smallest kindness becomes the moment that changes everything. And you never know who's waiting for someone just like you to show up.